All right, Charger fans, a little bit of a different episode this week. This is a episode I've wanted to do. The idea popped into my head just kind of thinking about the journey of this podcast, and I wanted to give you some insight on how the Electric Edge was started and came to be. So in this episode, I'm going to talk to you about why I started this podcast, how I got to this point, the events that led up to coming up with the idea of starting the Electric Edge podcast, and talk a little bit about my Chargers fandom. So be sure to subscribe to Electric Edge podcast on YouTube. You can also listen on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow me on all social media. I'm at Electric Edge Pod. So with that being said, let's jump into how the Electric Edge came to be. So I want to go back to 2024, particularly April of 2024, because I think this lead up into the creation of this podcast is important. So April of 2024, I had an ACL reconstruction on my left knee. I do not have very good luck when it comes to surgeries and my knees. Unfortunately, this was my fifth knee surgery and my second ACL reconstruction on my left knee. Being down from being active, being able to do the workouts I wanted to do, I decided I wanted to go back into fitness coaching. Prior to that, I used to own a gym, so I would teach group classes, do personal training, did some online coaching. So I decided, let me start this back up again and keep myself busy. So from 2024 until about June of 2025, I poured a lot of time, energy, and effort building a fitness coaching business. I've always worked out. I've been working out since I was a freshman in high school. I've done bodybuilding competitions. I've competed at the bikini level. I've won some medals doing it. So I've always been in great shape. It's just something that's always been a part of my life. And I wanted to really pursue and see if I can grow this into a business. So I put in a lot of time, effort, money into trying to grow my fitness business, and just wasn't ever able to gain traction no matter what I did, no matter what coaches I hired to help me build my business, the different marketing I tried to do. Just felt like I could never gain traction. And to a point, it almost felt like I was just forcing myself to do it because I wanted to see this through. So I got kind of frustrated June of 25. I'd spent, like I said, time, money, effort, you name it, into growing this, and just never felt like the wheels could fully get going. So I was on the phone with my husband. I think he was traveling for work, and we were on the phone. We were talking about the fitness business and, how I was frustrated with it. I just didn't know what direction to go into. And he's like, well, why don't you just go talk about the Chargers? I said, that's a great idea. He's like, you're very passionate about the Chargers. You love football. You love sports. So why don't you just start a podcast and start talking about it and see where it leads to? And I remember I was standing in the backyard pacing around, and then all these thoughts started filling my mind about, how I can start this great podcast and, what it could eventually lead to. But there's one thing that I realized talking about starting a Chargers podcast that I never seemed to be able to figure out or felt like when it came to the fitness stuff. And that was, there was just this wave of passion that came over me when I'm like, oh my God, I can sit and talk about Chargers football. And for me, it's pretty hard to talk about Chargers football with anyone. I mean, I can talk about it with my husband since he sits and watches the games with me or goes to games with me, but I don't have many friends that are into football like I am. Also, it's very hard when you're a female to talk sports with other females. So I thought this was a great way to just talk about Chargers football, talk about the news, talk about my opinions and analysis. And that night I started to develop a name and a logo, and the wheels just kept turning. And that's pretty much how the Electric Edge podcast came to be. I have to say, since starting this journey, I have absolutely loved every second of putting out Chargers content for you all. When I have viewers who tune into my show regularly, engage with me on YouTube or on social media, I feel like I'm actually doing something that I was meant to do and that I'm passionate about and that I actually enjoy doing. And just to backtrack on the stuff about fitness, yeah, you can be into something, but it really matters that you're fully passionate about it and invested in it. And my fitness stuff, it's always been a part of my life. Like I mentioned, I've competed. I was in the Army, so I was always physically fit. But this just feels different to me. I've been watching sports since I was 5. I mean, my first love out of the gate was the Yankees. I grew up in New Jersey, so my grandma and I would share our fandom for Yankees baseball. And then as I got older, I got into more sports and found the Chargers. And that's when my fandom began with the Chargers about 20 years ago at this point. So even with, talking about how the Electric Edge podcast came to be, I'd like to just leave you guys with some points. One, even if you're shy, which I am very introverted, I'm very quiet. I keep to myself. I'm very hesitant to put myself out there a lot of the time. If you're passionate about something and you want to do something, take the leap. You never know where it will lead you. I had no expectations going into this podcast of it becoming anything, and I've gained, I think, tremendous ground since I've started, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on TikTok, whether it's on Instagram, whether it's on X. I wake up every morning and I'm amazed that people are watching my content. They're commenting on my content. They're subscribing to my content. You'll never know what can happen until you put yourself out there. The other takeaway I have from starting this podcast is that everyone's going to have their own opinion. I get a lot of positive comments, but there's also some mean and hurtful comments. There's a lot of good in the world, and those people are out there. You just have to ignore the ones that aren't nice or filled with hate. There's too much hate in the world. Social media is, one of those things where people act tougher than what they are, and they say opinions that they would never say in person. But doing this podcast shows there's a lot of good in the world, and there's a lot of people who appreciate the time and effort that I put into my content. So if you have an idea similar to mine, I would tell you to take that leap of faith and get started on it. And then lastly, I think this podcast also has helped me grow into the Chargers community. I've pledged to the Die Hard Bull Club chapter out here. They've reshared my content. Some other big podcast names have connected with me in the Chargers realm. So it's been overall a very positive experience for me doing this podcast and interacting with Chargers fans, and sometimes not Chargers fans. Raiders fans and Chiefs fans love to comment on those videos where it's a game preview or a game recap. But regardless, like I said, the big takeaway is there's a lot of good people out there. There's a lot of people who are positive out there and will appreciate content that you put out. So if you have an idea similar to mine, like the Electric Edge podcast, I would encourage you to do the same. Put yourself out there, put your thoughts and ideas out there, and people will listen to you. With that being said, I love doing this podcast. I'm hoping it continues to grow. I love interacting with Chargers fans. I love talking Chargers football. I love going to the games and seeing people that I've interacted with on Twitter. I meet them, talk to them, have real conversations with them. That stuff is pretty awesome. So I will continue to do this until I can't no more. I'd love to see this podcast really blossom, and it couldn't be done without each and every one of you who tunes in to listen to me talk, rant, analyze everything Chargers football. So with that being said, I just wanted to put out this quick off-topic episode to talk about how this podcast came to be, kind of the journey I got here, and how much I appreciate each and every one of the fans that tunes in week after week to listen to me talk about Chargers football. Be sure to subscribe to Electric Edge Podcast on YouTube. You can also listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Follow me on all social media. I am on TikTok, and I am on Instagram at Electric Edge Pod. So with that being said, like I end every episode, go Chargers and bolt up.